but you can't, you won't, and you don't stop. Or when you can, you won't, and you don't stop.
Might be coming out for sure.
So in this module, we're going to start looking at how we use the law to work with one another. Using the law is probably not really the right way to think about it. The better way is probably to think about how do the relationships develop at law that allow us to work together. So this first module, what we're going to look at is the basic relationship behind all commerce around how people work for one another. And it's called agency law. We're also going to look at vicarious liability, which is kind of like agency law, except for other topics of law outside of contract. Okay, so agency law is essentially how does one person make a contract for another person? And vicarious liability is where are you responsible for what another person actually does? So these are both integral to business, as you can imagine, where we do work for other people. And they apply no matter what kind of business structure that you've actually got. It's kind of independent of the business structure. Because really at the end of the day, only people can do things, right? So there might be a coffee shop that's owned by a company, a particular kind of legal structure we're going to get to. But in the end, it's only the people in there, the baristas, the wait staff, etc., the cleaners. It's only people who do things. It's only those people who are negligent or who enter contracts. So how is it that someone like maybe a barista can enter a contract for the company? What rules govern that? And that's what we're going to look at in this particular module. So really what we want to do is we want to start out by describing this legal relationship. And what we find is we need to have a few terms that we're familiar with. The first one is this idea of a principal. Okay, so the principal is the person who does the appointing, or who does, perhaps a better word, is the delegating, right? They're the person who wants something done. And they delegate power to another person who we will call the agent. So remember back to that coffee shop example I started with. This is the coffee shop or the coffee shop owner, and the agent will be the barista. Okay. And then the agent interacts with the customer. And in agency law, we call this person the third party. So this is the kind of relationship that we have, and we need to understand the rights and responsibilities of the people involved in this, the agent and the principal. We want to know what the agent can do, their scope of authority, what their duties are and what they're entitled to do. When might this person be liable? When might the agent be liable? So if you're working in a coffee shop, when might you be liable rather than the coffee shop? And how do you terminate this relationship, right? How do you get rid of your agent if you need to? We're also going to go beyond the idea of contract, because this is essentially about how do we form contracts between one person, principal, and the third party. And we're going to look at other kinds of liability, vicarious liability. So that's where you're liable for the conduct of someone else. A good example of that, for instance, is when would the coffee shop be liable for your negligence as the barista? Well, for that to be, there must be vicarious liability. And there are some rules around that we're going to go through. When I say the word agent, many things might pop into your head. A travel agent, a real estate agent, probably not a secret agent, because that's got nothing to do with what we're talking about. But these other agents, like real estate agents and travel agents, are particular kinds of agency. But this agency is a general relationship. It's where one person is acting on behalf of another. So it's not just about business, but in essence, most business relationships where you're employing people and getting them to do something for you are actually about agency. And that raises a number of questions for us, right? What is the agent able to do? What must the agent do? What are their duties? What is the agent responsible for? When does that relationship end? There's all kinds of questions that come up once we recognise that we have these relationships of people working for one another. So what we have here is a kind of better diagram of that relationship I was describing earlier. The really central important thing to conceptually understand here is that what we're talking about is forming a contract between the principal and the third party, so that one of the people involved in the negotiations, the agent, actually is not party to the contract. So think about that. It's like when you buy a coffee from the coffee shop, you as the customer are party to the contract, and the coffee shop is party to the contract. They're probably a company, or it might be a single owner, a sole trader. So they're the two parties to the contract, and the barista has kind of no role in that contract, right? You can't sue the barista if the coffee isn't up to standard as per the terms of the contract, right? You have to sue the coffee shop. Right? So that's what's going on. That's why it's so important. So let's dive in a little. So what we have is this principle authorizing the agent to deal with other people, to deal with these third parties. These third parties could be customers, for instance. That's an example in retail. So the agent deals with the customers and the customers deal with the agent. So this is where the actual transactions occur physically, right? But it's as if that you were dealing with the principal. That's legally what's going on. And because the agent is acting for the principal, they have to report back, right? They're accountable to the principal for what they actually do. And as a result of this legal relationship, we get this binding agreement between the principal and the third party, with the agent not involved in that binding agreement. So consequently, business owners are legally bound, right, by what their staff do, and even torts and crimes in certain instances. That's what vicarious liability is about. A person who's acting on behalf of another when dealing with a third party is called the agent, and the person they're acting for is the principal. Look, there's a ton of actual relationships that are agency. We've got a few of the most important. And as you can see here, the classic employer-employee is an agency relationship. The idea of a corporation and its director, it's an agency relationship, as well as those more formal agency relationships that you might naturally think of. And that's why this is such an important area of law for